Hi, Michelle.
Hi, hi, Wangi. Nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. It's been a while.
Yes, let me just deal with a cat that's decided to visit us.
Okay, no worries. I think we're 1 minute. We have 1 minute to go. Then the MC will open the webinar.
Brilliant.
Okay, so good morning, Michelle.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Oh, good afternoon for you.
Yeah, it's good afternoon, good morning. Yeah, so I'm on behalf of the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. We invite you to give some speech about related to the topic about research with the orientation to the industrial. Yeah, so it's very nice to meet you. I'm welcoming you, and we also would like to welcome you because this is the program that we had in the last 2 months. We starting with the program of a webinar, and we are inviting some speakers from abroad, including you. So it is very nice to meet you this afternoon, this morning. And then, yeah, with the help of Ibu Wangi, yeah, for contacting you about and then informing you about this program. So hopefully this program will be useful for us in the way we can make or we can build a strategic industrial-oriented research. So thank you very much once again for your speech here. And yeah, maybe I can give the time and the floor to Wangi and to continue.
Maybe straight to the MC, so we can just open the webinar.
Yeah.
Right, I will start this webinar, I guess. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, best regards. The Honorable Head of Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering Gajah Mada University, Mr. Budi Hartono. The Honorable Speakers, Mrs. Michelle Underwood, as Research and Development Manager of University of Warwick, United Kingdom. The Honorable Moderator, Mrs. Wangi Pandansari, as Industrial Engineering Lecturer, as well as fellow the participants who already attend in this meeting room. Good afternoon and welcome to all participants of the third 2021 Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka webinar. Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka is a special program from Ministry of Education and Culture, Republic of Indonesia. We are so glad to meet all of you at this third webinar event with the theme, How to Design a Strategic Industrial-Oriented Research. First of all, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Rika, and I'm an industrial engineering student, as well as the master of ceremony of this event, who will guide the course of today's event. Before we start, I want to remind the participants to turn the microphone off so that this event remains conducive. Before entering the next agenda, please allow me to recite this webinar's rundown as follows. Speech from the representative of the Mechanical and Industrial Engineering Department, and then webinar session, which consists of material exposure by Mrs. Michelle Underwood, and then question and answer session, and the last one is photo session and closing. Well, we will enter the following schedule. That's the speech by Mr. Insinyur Budi Hartono as head of Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. To Mr. Insinyur Budi Hartono, the time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Mechanical and Industrial Engineering Department, Faculty of Engineering, Universitas Gadjah Mada, welcomes all participants on the third installment of the webinar series MBKM. Good research should be academically sound and impactful, and one way to measure societal impact is by looking for the benefits towards industry. Today's webinar offers a platform to discuss this exciting topic of designing a strategic industrial-oriented research. Our gratitude goes to our distinguished speaker, Ms. Michelle Underwood, Researcher Development Manager, University of Warwick, UK. She is an experienced research developer, Senior Fellow of HEA, and a Fellow of Warwick International HEA. I would like also to thank to Dr. Wangi Pandansari for the moderator and Dr. Budi Arifianto and team for organizing this webinar series. May we have a fruitful discussion today. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Well, thank you very much to Mr. Budi Hartono for your opening remarks. And then the following agenda is the main event which we have been waiting for. That's a webinar session delivered by speakers who are indeed very good in her fields. On this day, the webinar session will be filled by Mrs. Michelle Underwood as Research Development Manager of University of Warwick, United Kingdom. And as interested speakers, today's webinar session will be directly guided by our reliable moderator as Industrial Engineering Lecturer. This is the resume from Mrs. Wangi. Is it visible? Oh, okay. Mrs. Wangi is a lecturer in Industrial Engineering major. She is alumni of Industrial Engineering Gadjah Mada University and also Engineering and Engineering Systems major at University of Warwick. She has several research experiences, as we can see on the screen, and also she participated in several publications and funding. After this, the event will be hosted by Mrs. Wangi. So, Mrs. Wangi, are you ready to guide this session?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Rika.
Okay, Mrs. Wangi, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, again, I would like to greet our main speaker for today's session. So welcome, Michelle. Good morning. It's very good to see you again. And thank you for accepting our invitation to be the main speaker of this webinar series. I would also like to greet our audience. Good afternoon. We're very happy to have all of you here attending our webinar series. So my name is Wangi and I will be the moderator for today's session. So before we proceed to our main event, let me introduce a little bit about Michelle. Yeah, so I've known Michelle since 2018. So it's been a few years. So I had the opportunity to work with her in a Student as Partner project, which is also the inspiration of the programs that we are currently doing here at the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. Michelle is a researcher development manager. Her works is all about creating creating empowering environments. She's very keen on research. She's very keen on undergraduate research and how to advance the research and the impact of the research for the undergraduate students. So maybe the one of the term that I would like to emphasize here is the inclusivity, because Michelle is also very keen on widening the participations so that this research can be accessible to as many students as possible. So I think that's enough introduction from me about Michelle. I'm sure Michelle will tell you all the detail in her talk that coming up. So without further ado, I would let the audience hear directly from Michelle. So Michelle, please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. Right, I shall start sharing my screen. I'm going to start. Sorry. Come on, screen share. Thank you. Can you now see my screen?
It disappeared. It was there a while ago.
Can you now see that screen? There we go.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. So let me just get it so that I can see you. That's great. Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be able to stand here and talk to people in Indonesia, you know, in your afternoon and my day, morning. And if there can be any benefits from the last couple of years in our strange global situation, for me, this is being able to recognize how global we are as researchers and make those connections. So thank you very much for inviting me. I want to talk to you today about students as partners as into that industrial process, and how that students as partners can actually, and the ability to do undergraduate research is the absolute way into being part of that industrial design process. My daily work is about supporting the postgraduate researchers during their doctorate, and it's helping them getting the best out of that experience and enabling them to contribute successfully to their research. As has been said, I'm very passionate about creativity, and it's important to research. And I'm a great believer that sometimes the obvious isn't the answer. And this is where I'm really passionate about how we engage undergraduates and those people who are not necessarily into that PhD level process into research in an early stage. Sometimes what I think can't be done, because my experience tells me it can't be done, needs somebody to come in and say, actually, why do you do it that way? Or could it be done that way? We need a different perspective. So this is why I believe we need to engage more people with research at all stages. It allows people to bring new and different versions and ideas, allows concept to be discussed and solutions to be found when we're now facing through some very pressing global challenges. So my presentation today is going to be about two concepts, and hopefully that will draw you into understanding why I value your engagement, and trying to explain to you why I think you should be involved in research within industrial partners. So I'm going to look at undergraduate research, and I'm going to look at the students as partners process. And I'm going to use the 2-year research project that Wang Yu was part of as my case study. And what I'm hoping to demonstrate that both these concepts are extremely powerful tools for progress and change, and both give and hold great responsibility. So I want to start with 2 quotes. First quote by Darling and Hammond: "We are currently preparing students for jobs that do not yet exist, to use technologies that have not yet been invented, and to solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet." And this was written in 2008. And I think specifically in the last 2 years, we've realized that we face new global, local, and specific challenges. But what we have demonstrated is that we're moving now towards a more globalized community where we can work on common challenges, common themes, and I really hope soon some common and local solutions. Before COVID, we already knew that we needed to think how and why we educate people. We recognized that the straightforward education wasn't always going to be the solution, and we needed to think beyond the standard and the obvious. What we needed to ask is what is relevant now for the 21st century and where next. What I hope you'll gain is an understanding of how you can contribute to the solution of these real world problems, how your creativity, your new perspective could be providing the solution to our challenges. What is at stake here is expanding the accessibility of undergraduate research opportunities to a body of students as diverse as possible. So as I said earlier, my experience might tell me the solution is not available or won't work, but your creativity, your new ideas can alter that. And finally, I want to encourage you throughout that engaging in an opportunity like this, take the responsibility, your responsibility for supporting your local or global community, your responsibility in having an impact on your community, and your responsibility in a positive experience to benefit yourself as well. So I want to use this phrase, context is as key. And this became the main principle behind the WRAP project, the Widening Research and Participation Project, and influences all my work. So partners and future partners, whether they're work colleagues, research partners, or student colleagues, need to see how they can fit into a space, to see how they can utilize their known skills, excuse me, and also their unknown abilities. We need to make sure that everyone is clear as to what it will look like. So I want to tell you a little bit more about my teaching background and how that influenced my decisions about starting a research, Students as Partners research project. I will then go on to tell you about the WRAP case study, its findings about undergraduate research and problem-based learning, and what this could mean for you in an industrial-based setting and also within your academic experience. I also want to share the principles we agreed for Students as Partners, and I want to examine the reflections and the lived experience of the 6 people involved within the project. So I started out in outdoor education. I took groups of people, senior management teams from multinationals, of school children, of ex-offenders, of young people at risk into the mountains, onto rivers, into caves, into new and unfamiliar environments. And this is where they needed to make decisions or take charge, take responsibility, and often cope. And I saw people thrive with a new role, seeing people grow because they were trusted and seeing people challenged because they had no or new limits. And this allowed them to find the creativity to find solutions for themselves. So I took this knowledge and experience into my teaching, into my work, where I have a strong belief about handing responsibility to my colleagues and my employees. So my role at Warwick is supporting people through studying for their PhD. I don't provide them solutions, I just provide responsibility and challenge. Also, as a feminist researcher, I've always incorporated my research cohort into the research process. And this ensures that my research participants have input into the direction, purpose, and ultimately the outcome of the research. My intention has always been to research on someone's behalf, and if possible, ensure that they participate in the discussions about the research and process. In doing this, I hope that my research participants are enabled by being part of the research project, and it's a benefit to them directly. So it's these 2 drivers which made my decisions about the WRAP project. But before I want to talk more about the project, I just need to clarify some terms for you. So the key aspect, excuse me, the key aspect of widening participation, it was part of a UK government political agenda to increase the numbers of people attending university. And they targeted interventions for particularly underrepresented students at university. And we also used the term underrepresented because it recognised and reflected additional barriers to accessing the same opportunities that we were finding some of our more traditional undergrads had. And diversity in research, again, is an area that I think reflects, and again, has been what I've said, and I will carry on repeating, is we need more people with different perspectives into research. And then what do I mean by undergraduate research or problem-based learning? So to me, it's about discovery, and it's gaining new knowledge when we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And this is seeing a problem and trying out versions to see what could be the solution. It may be repeating and repeating a task to see whether the item fails or whether it does the same thing every time. It's asking questions, building and evaluating models, proposing hypotheses, designing studies, selecting methods, gathering and analysing data, or identifying meaningful variation. It's actually navigating the messiness of real-world data. It's something that we do on a daily basis, but we need to trust ourselves that we can add value to the discussions and research. And this is where we come in on our industrial partners. How do we go in? We have these same things that we can bring in. So this is my 5 research colleagues, and this is my case study. As you can see, they covered a range of disciplines. And I want to say this is more about them than me. I will share where I came in, but this is all the work of my peers. So in 2017, I was managing an undergraduate research summer project opportunity, an opportunity for undergraduates to apply for some support funding to help them undertake a research project in the UK or abroad during the summer vacation. We knew the experiences were transformative, and it was an opportunity to devise and explore a research question, work in a lab, work with an industrial partner, undertake interviews, produce reports. However, whilst the projects were well funded, I felt that those who may not have the additional financial support from family, or who had work commitments, or maybe had to support family, were not getting the same opportunity. I needed to know what we could do to make this a more equitable experience, one in particular which our widening participation undergrads could access, as well as their more privileged colleagues. As I said earlier, if I was to research into the cohort, then the cohort had to be part of the research process itself. So I succeeded in getting funding, which allowed me to fund a research team, which was 3 postgraduates and 2 undergraduate researchers for 2 years. Starting off with basically finding out whether our competitive summer scheme was sufficient. Could it or need it be altered to be more inclusive? So this was the start of the RAP project process. And our starting point with our project was to get a full understanding of our local position. We wanted to know specifically what undergraduate research opportunities did we have at Warwick in all our departments as a whole. And this included research projects within modules, and whether people could write dissertations or any opportunity to be part of lab work. We know that Warwick is a research-intensive university, so where on this research teaching nexus did we sit? Were our undergraduates participants, or were they the audience? The team then looked more specifically at the undergraduate research summer scheme, the URSS. What was departmental take-up of the URSS? How well was it supported in their departmental web pages? How active were departments in encouraging their undergraduates to participate? And this was bearing in mind that each undergraduate needed a supervisor to support them in their project. The team also examined WP numbers and representations to see if that would tell us anything. The research team then looked nationally to see how Warwick's summer scheme and departmental offerings compared to 160 other universities in Britain. Using a performer template, they examined university websites to seek information, and what they found was that URSS was one of the few summer schemes available nationally and one of the better ones. However, what we also found was there was relatively few opportunities to be engaged in research at an undergraduate level, even if you consider it just as being a dissertation. What we then came to the question of, was this relative lack of opportunities driven by undergraduates' lack of interest, or was it because of their desires for measurables and grades, or was it being driven by universities wanting to provide a commodified educational process? So we realised that we needed to get a greater in-depth opinion of what Warwick undergraduates thought. So early in 2019, we began our primary research stage, and this was actually going out and talking to undergraduates at Warwick. The RAP team ran a questionnaire, 4 focus groups and 11 interviews. Because it was basically interviewing undergraduates, the importance was that the interviews were run by the postgraduate team. What we found was there was a positive attitude to undergraduate research, a desire to be a participant rather than the audience, a recognition of the learning benefits to be gained. We spoke to people who were frustrated about the lack of opportunities even to do a dissertation. We also spoke to people who had no desire for it. Their focus was getting a good summer internship and good knowable grades. They were concerned about the metrics, and what they wanted to do was leave with a 2-1 or a first. We also found that people wanted it to be part of their curriculum rather than an add-on for the summer. We shared our findings with the education executive at Warwick, and whilst there's been no large changes to how things are done, there have been some small adaptations, and these have improved awareness and access. So several departments have contacted us to say that they now offer a dissertation. Others are now offering small focused research time in labs to demonstrate and educate, and others have raised awareness of the URSS. Engineering at Warwick also contacted us to discuss how we could evaluate reflective models and how that would work. The URSS has now started to utilise PhDs to supervise some of their projects, which makes the issue around accessing a supervisor easier for some of the more potential participants. They haven't created a WP bursary scheme, which was one of our big recommendations. My new line manager sometimes reassures me that sometimes it's about timing. It's about having the right people in the right place and to hear the message that you're sending. I think there was some disappointment that there weren't some of the changes that we wanted, but I will go back next year. We have new colleagues, senior colleagues in place, and I shall speak to them again. One of our first conclusions, and one of the team's first conclusions, was the notion of value added. And this is what I want to emphasize for yourself, to encourage you to be involved with your industrial partners, to get in there and speak, to recognize these values that are added. But what we also recognized was that there was value revealed, and sometimes people recognizing values in themselves or others that they may not have otherwise seen before. What we recognised was that undergraduate research is a powerful tool for transforming the undergraduate experience of all students. However, what we do recognise, and what I'm hearing from when I talk to Rangi and your colleagues, is that it needs to be embedded within institutional culture. It can't be something that is seen as a discrete add-on. Certainly at Warwick, if we have it as that, it gets ignored. And as you will see how much I value process, it needs to be included in all your. So the RAP project worked through as a students as research project. And I think this is, again, it's a valuable process of when we're thinking about when we're working in industry. So it's a collaborative process in which everybody is aware of that context and everyone can visualize themselves as being part of those wider actions. And I really like to emphasize the statement, contribute equally, although not necessarily in the same ways. People have different skill sets which they employ to the best of their projects, but people need to step out of their comfort zones, stretch themselves and stretch their knowledge, knowing that they've got the full support of each other. However, there needs to be some guidelines when we do this, some principles that we can use. And for me, these have come into trust and respect, shared power, shared risks, and shared learning. These are all essential, but we designed our own too as part of the RAP team. The first one I wanted to add was I wanted to empower rather than direct. I wanted to ensure that the relationships between the researcher and the researchee, the power relationship was mitigated. And I wanted to ensure that my researchees not only had a voice in the project, but were actively engaged in the research itself. By employing undergraduates to be part of the team, I allowed for a practice-based example which supported all of our development and learning. And what I want you to understand is that Students' Powers empowers all the participant stakeholders by upholding respect, reciprocity, and responsibility as the underlying principles. This became our second anchor and came from our initial meeting together, which allowed us to set the tone of how we would value each other's contributions and how we would be reliable and supportive. Our third anchor allowed us to revise the paradigm of power, not only within the educational context, but also within and without of the research practice itself. But it was prioritising student agency throughout. The researchees, i.e. the undergraduates, would only be contacted by their peers, i.e. the student research team. And predominantly all dissemination would be via the student research team. My role was to advise, support, question, and be informed. The only aspects which I did, which was not available to the teams, was applying for the ethics approval. And this was mostly on the basis that the research data would need to be held by member of staff for the next 10 years. I also had first eyes on the questionnaire that we did, so this removing all the identifiable data. And this was ensuring that we wouldn't be putting one of the research team in a position of knowing something about one of their peers that either side might be uncomfortable with. Our actions also allowed the team to speak for itself, to make contacts and represent us nationally and internationally. All presentations were done by the research team, whether that was internal advisory sessions or information sharing at conferences. As a facilitator trainer, I was responsible for any workshop design and delivery, but had the team working with me as co-facilitators. Both our undergraduates spoke at an international conference of undergraduate research, ICA, and Dan spoke at the World Congress of Undergraduate Research. It's very rare that I get to speak about this project without the team with me. And finally, ultimately, students can transition from passive consumers to active participants in the production of knowledge, and institutions are presented with an opportunity to implement a paradigm of teaching and learning that creates winners out of all students. I think that speaks for itself. But there are challenges, whether it's for undergraduate research or the student as partners process. So some staff or students are risk averse, and some would struggle with the level of responsibility, whether it's sharing or taking on that connection. Some staff will find delivering lectures a simpler way through the education teaching process, so they can focus more of their energies on their research role. In response to colleagues' concerns about grading, we produced evaluation procedures which allow for the research projects to be similarly marked as set coursework. And I would like to also reinforce that there are many stages and interpretations of the students as partners process, and many stages and processes and interpretations of undergraduate research. many of which wouldn't require the level of commitment and investment that the RAP project had from the student research team. And again, it's just to reinforce that undergraduate research is about that process of discovery, the asking the questions, evaluating and applying them to the processes that we have learned. Ultimately, we have to stop being the audience and become a participant in our own learning process. So finally, I just want to share with you some of the reflections that we had as a team. Ultimately, we saw the student-staff partnership as an asset-building experience. We see that researchers can be involved in a project where tasks are completed and ideas explored that one person might not be able to do alone. This requires a team to function as a unit, but with a common aim, a positive and mindful practice, and a respectful approach makes this possible. So I want to conclude the presentation with just some of the reflective statements from the various members of the team, and then some links out to further details of the project. So I hope you'll consider greatly the opportunities that come with you to go and work with an industrial partner. I think that we rely on new knowledge coming through, new experiences. And I think people will, if you can see from my case study, how much of that process is valued on both sides. Both, whether it's working in that industry, whether it's working in academia, that connection with somebody who can be inspiring, and taking that responsibility to drive new knowledge, taking responsibility to help come up with solutions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, for such an inspiring talk. So Michelle's been talking about the importance of context in any partnership. So if I can just, summarize a little bit before we move on to the Q&A session. Also talk about the widening participation and interesting case study where she founded this widening participation research project where I was included. So I've worked with Michelle for about 2 years. It was such an inspiring experience, I would say. So yeah, I think it's very clear from Michelle's talk the importance of doing research, that research is a powerful tool, how important it is for especially undergraduate students to get involved as early as possible during their 4 years of university. And also Michelle talked about the Students as Partner initiative, which is part of the things that we're currently doing here at the department as well. So it's how impactful it can be from different kind of programs that can be done when students are encouraged to transform from passive learners to active participants, so students can take ownership of their learning. which I think it's true for many cases, because at least it was true for me, because when I was students, I think I forgot almost everything's been taught, except those small things that I've done by myself. So probably that's the idea, where instead of having students listened only in classroom and having fed all the knowledge from the instructors, they should be able to take responsibility and take ownership of their learning. And that's I think the essence of having students as partner initiative. Yeah, but as Michelle said, it's not easy, because it comes with challenges, which Michelle also talked about having the less motivation, students being risk averse, and resistance from them, because we're used to this kind of culture where students just sit down and take whatever given to them in the classroom. So yeah, probably that's a little bit summary of what the talk was about. So now we're moving on to the next agenda, which is a question and answer session. So if there's any questions from our audience, please, you can use the feature of raise hand, or otherwise you could also, I think, yeah, you can type your questions in the chat box, then I'll read that for Michelle. So please, is there any questions from the audience? Okay. Is there any questions? So Michelle, this is probably one of the things you also talk about, having great other students. And yeah, I think it's very challenging, especially, like in Indonesian environment where students are very risk averse, I would say. Like, oh, okay, so there's a questions. Let me read it out for you, Michelle. Thank you for your interesting talk. Sometimes research becomes a scary thing for undergraduate students, and some students indeed fail or face difficulties when doing research, even though they show promising abilities in class. In this case, how to motivate students in doing research, and what approach should be taken by educators and lecturers to help students going through the research? So that's a question from Mr. Rifai. So please, Michelle, if you could kindly answer.
Thank you. Yes, and I think it is what I was hoping people would understand is that, we are risk averse. We do need some knowns. We are committing to our 4 years of our undergraduate program. We want to be assured of what outcome we have. And so I think it's up to institutions to make sure that there is a recognition that the research process at undergraduate level is essential and needs to be supported the same way as it would the mainstream lecture seminar series. And I think it's about thinking about how we evaluate these so that there is knowables and processes that we can engage with. So I think we have to look at it at an institutional level to start off with, of making sure that there are metrics that that you can be part of that would give you the same outcomes as if you had gone through a lecture series. I think it needs to be valued institutionally and a process so that we can encourage people to engage with it and not think necessarily just about having you as that audience where we go, here's some knowledge, repeat that knowledge back to us in 4 years' time, and thank you. The learning has to be embedded, and I think, as Wangi said, it's the things that you do for yourself that you remember. And I think engineering is such a creative discipline, and this is why I think I'm so particularly passionate about engineering being involved in undergraduate research, because it's such a creative discipline. It is about finding solutions. It is about thinking about how those local or those global challenges could be met. And so I think we have that responsibility. And I think you have that responsibility as engineers specifically to use that abilities that you have at an early stage, because there's nothing to say that your knowledge isn't as good as somebody else's. So I think it's about us being brave, or yourselves being brave. It's one of the things I say to my PhDs when they arrive: be brave. So I would suggest to you, institutions need to embed it. Undergraduates need to be brave, and you need to take responsibility, because you do have solutions and we need to encourage you to find them. So I think an all persons approach to that. I hope that helps.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Is there any other questions for Michelle?
Hello, I have a question for Michelle. I'm Asin, a junior lecturer from Gajah Mada University.
Please, Mr. Asin, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting presentation. And I have one question that's really important for the young scientists when they just coming out from the abroad and then they got a PhD degree and everything is not smooth enough. Like everything, like the atmosphere is not the same like what they did during the PhD, or the equipment that they found it in the, like when they back to the home countries, everything is like from scratch, and we cannot like directly just not only to do a research with a student, even how to doing a research in the basic research is not available yet. So do you have any suggestion that how we can maintain not only to build a good research or equipment, but also how we can maintain our support or motivation that we can always to do a research, and how to teach a student with the best environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Asin,
Such
for
a
the question.
fantastic question.
Yeah, please go ahead, Michelle.
I think, I mean, the question about research equipment, there obviously are countries that are going to have materials and other countries that aren't going to, but I think it's looking at those local and those global solutions. And it's that creativity, I'm going to reinforce this, it's the creativity of engineers of being able to look at something and go, how can I use that in a different way? How can I adapt that? How can I use what I have around me? Because it's sometimes not using the obvious to find the solution. And we need to find solutions that work for us where we are. That doesn't mean, and one of the things that I think is really important in my day role working with researchers at PhD level and beyond, is I reinforce how globalized we've come. And I think this is essential, this is my aspiration for us becoming more globalized as researchers, in that materials are shared more readily from global north to global south. There is more access to that. It's going to take some time. We've got some barriers and some mountains to climb on that. But I do think that we have the capability to utilize what we have, to interpret what we have, whilst we're waiting for the global north to catch up with the fact that they need to share their equipment a bit more readily. There are ways, and I think we can come up with that. The motivation and support, again, I think as we are more globalized, as the connections are made, the program of training that I do for the PhDs at Warwick has gone online totally, and will stay online. We won't be going back to in-person events, because this has allowed us to work on sessions where I have people in China, in Australia, all around the world, whilst we've been needing to put sessions on to support people. And it's allowed us to really reinforce that globalized researcher role. And what we've learned from that process is that we need to maintain those networks. We need to maintain those connections. And so that's the support that I'm putting in for them now, is to build those connections and to keep there. And we will stay online to support that. And my intention is ultimately to build a program that works on the various different time zones, so that I have colleagues now who are getting up in the middle of their night to come and access training. We were able at one time, I had a colleague who was working in Australia who could put on training sessions in Australian time zones, which allowed people to access training at a better time. So there's more to be done about that motivation and support, and people not working in isolation. And we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep telling people why it's important that we stay as globalized researchers, that we keep those connections, that we remind people what we've learnt in the last 2 years, because there has been so much learning, and we have to remind people how we've made those connections. So there isn't a short-term solution. There is always long-term solutions, but it's up to us, and it's that bit of the power of responsibility. It's up for us to keep knocking at doors, keep reminding people what we need to do, and keep those connections going. Thank you.
Does that
Asim,
answer
does that
the
help?
questions, Mr. Asim?
Okay, thank you so much for your
Oh, it seems like Asim's got some technical issue.
Yeah, that's the ideal idea
Oh,
of
Mr. Asim, unfortunately, we cannot hear you very well. Is it only me or? Oh,
No, it's breaking up for me as well.
okay. Oh, I think it's out, maybe some technical issue. Okay, so maybe another questions from the audience. Do we have any more questions? Okay, so yeah, Michelle, it's been very challenging actually to encourage, students, because students who are interested in all these things, they would look for the opportunities themselves. But then students who are risk averse, like they don't really want to get involved. But we do want to have all the students to experience this benefits of doing research and having experience with industries. So do you have any suggestions for that, or maybe like for students who's interested but don't really know where to start? Do you have any advice on how and where they can start from?
Excuse me. So I think start early is always my suggestion. It starts early in the undergraduate process, allowing people to see how they can engage. It's that context of, we need people to understand what the context is. We need people to see how they can engage in it, and people need to see what they can benefit from it, but also how they can benefit, the process. So I would say start early and build incrementally. Nothing has to be as big as, say, the RAT project was. That was quite a step for 5 students. So having, even starting with the problem-based learning of maybe having an industrial partner come in with a problem, of this is what we're thinking about this area, we'd like some possible solutions. Now, this may be a mocked up scenario, but it could be that process where people start to learn to consult with a client, in this case, an industrial partner, thinking about potential solutions, thinking about how they could engage with products. And it starts people to be able to think about what is known and what is unknown and how they can involve themselves through that problem-based learning. It's that sort of chart that I had earlier. And I think it's about increasing that level of unknown, as people go through, so they can, feel supported, they can be challenged at the beginning, but as you take them through the undergraduate process and into their research careers, is building that level of unknowable, unknown, risk, challenge, because people will be able to pull on their own resources, their own learning from their first experience of, I managed to solve something and I know what it's like to work in a team. I know how to rely on other people to get a job done. So all those learning things that we talked about can be built up slowly and gradually encourage people to maybe take those steps. Even at Warwick, a lot of the departments didn't even have a dissertation option in their final year. And that's taken quite a change of thinking for some departments to actually go, why aren't we doing this? So even that, with some places trying to even just integrate that dissertation process. So I think it's about building, and it could be a whole dissertation. It could be going and working with an industrial partner as part of that dissertation. It could be being as a student consultant group, working out, dealing with those industry partners. And I think that then becomes reciprocal because industry starts to recognize the creativity and the value of people thinking at a very early stage about solutions. Like I say, I will look at a problem and go, it won't work, because I will use my experience and my, knowledge of problem solving. Go, oh, there is no solution. Whereas somebody who's not entrenched in that value can come in and go, well, there is a solution if you think about it in a different way. And I think our industrial partners need to understand that as well. So I think it's a learning process for both sides. So I think in a way I'm almost sort of answering the how and the why. I think giving people small opportunities to learn, to reflect on their own learning, why that's worked for them, and then how to take that learning into the next stage. So taking the experience of when I used to take people into the mountains, it was a very unfamiliar, uncertain environment, and one that they weren't ever going to meet again. I wasn't training them to be up in the hills. I was trying to make something unfamiliar. And what they learned from that unfamiliar situation was a sense of self and a sense of capability within themselves. And the learning of like, I faced something new and I faced something unknown. And I faced something quite daunting, but I have the resource within myself to be a valuable team member, to rely on myself, and to come up with solutions where I didn't think there was a solution. And that was what was taking, that's the principle I've taken from working in the mountains to working with people now. It's the same process. We need to become a participant in our own learning. We need to become a participant in our own world. We have huge global challenges that we need to solve. So it's about how do we go and engage with that. We can't find a solution straight off, but we need to take small steps. And that sense of reliance and the sense of taking that small step, did it work? Yes, it did. What did I learn? That reflective process as well. So if I can just encourage people to participate.
Be active, especially students.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think, Mr. Budi, questions? I think you raised hand before.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Puwangi. Thank you for your presentation, Michelle. It is very, very nice and so inspiring. Well, when thinking about the topics of your presentation about the student as partner, so I think we have to correlate with something like student proactivity, right? And dealing with this kind of thing, I think there is a difference between the culture, or there's an influence of a culture on the student proactivity, at least in my opinion, because I just recall my memory when I was involved in a project with students from Europe. They were very, very active to participate in the educations and also in the discussion or something, which is which was very different with students from Indonesia, from Asia. With these kind of things, then my conclusions is that that the culture is really involved in the how can we say, involved in the proactivity of the students. According to your experience, how can we deal with such kind of cultural differences in relationship with the student proactivity in the education?
Thank you very much. I was talking to a PhD researcher the other day who is, she is a law teacher from Germany and is looking at how she devised a module about the United Nations. And what she was doing was taking her school into, discovering the United Nations, taking them to the United Nations events. And what she had was, she said, there's a fairly average school in Germany, not particularly successful, not particularly wealthy. And she was taking these groups of children into situations where there was usually only diplomats' children, or more privileged children, and demonstrate. And what she recognized and what she is now researching further is the immense amount of learning that her school children went through by being having the opportunity to see and understand new concepts that they otherwise wouldn't see. And but we were also discussing that often when we see certain people in certain situations, they're not necessarily representative of the whole. So I would say, yes, the people you've met, the European undergrads, may seem very proactive, very understanding, very forward, but I wouldn't say they were necessarily representative of British undergraduates as a whole. There is that social and cultural capital that a lot of our Warwick undergrads come through, because they have been through an education system which has basically taken them through to going to university like Warwick. But they are still also very reticent, and they still want to be an audience because they want measurables. So they want to know, are they going to leave with a 2-1 in the first? And they won't take risks with that, because everything has been processed that they need to leave Warwick with that first or 2-1. So I think they're quite a risk-averse university and quite a risk-averse undergraduate community, because of that. And other universities I've worked at, I would say people are prepared to take more routes through because they've, yes, they are buying, they want to get their degree, but also they understand the process of learning. They understand the challenges they've been through to get to that education opportunity. And so I think sometimes the people who haven't had necessarily the smoothest path or the easiest access to education have had to problem solve at an earlier stage and have had to think differently to get themselves to that educational opportunity. This is why I want people to recognize is those challenges that they've experienced before they've got to their undergraduate process that actually are the key drivers of their future success. It's that ability to think differently because it's not been obvious. So I think what we need to enable people to do is find the value in themselves and recognize how much they have to contribute. And that is a very slow, reflective process. And I think it's something that we need to do as staff is try and enable those conversations about what people have to contribute to the education system, what people have to contribute to the knowledge base. And sometimes it's that diversity that has driven people to go to university, that has enabled someone or pushed someone to go to that university experience, that really has to be pulled out to be is the greatest marker of success in that area. I don't think necessarily some of our undergraduates who just arrive at Warwick and leave 3 years later with a degree, who haven't engaged in the educational process really, are going to inspire much knowledge. It's the people who've had the challenge up to that point who continue to face challenges. I think, it's why education needs to change. We need to find that value revealed in everybody. And I think that value isn't always in the obvious person. So it's not in the privileged education process. It's in the people that have got to education in a different way. So yeah, I think we need to find that value, and we have to find it in ourselves to be able to draw it out of our students. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
All right. Is there any other questions? Okay, if there's no further questions, I think we would end our Q&A session up to this point, and I'll give the time back to our MC, Ms. Rika, please. The time is back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Michelle and Mrs. Wangi, for presenting the insightful materials. Hopefully, you can take the incredible knowledge from the last session. Okay, before we move to the last session, let us capture the moment with today's speakers and moderator through a group photo session. So please, for all the participants to turn on the camera now. For the participants who doesn't turn on the cameras yet, I will wait until maybe a minute. Okay, I think I will start the photo session now. There are 6 slides in this Zoom meeting, and I will start from the first slide. So, ready. Okay, I will count 3, 2, 1 from the first slide. Okay, first slide, 3, 2, 1. The second slide, 3, 2, 1. The third slide, 3, 2, 1. The fourth slide, 3, 2, 1. The fifth slide, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the last slide, 3, 2, 1. Right, thank you very much for your contribution for this photo session. Now, because the time has shown around 5, on behalf of the committee, we are very grateful for your active role in participating in the series of events from the beginning. Merdeka, as the host and representing the committee, ask for permission to retire. Thank you for all your participation, and I apologize if there are errors and shortcomings during this event implementation today. Okay, well, that's from me. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll see another occasion.
Yes, thank you very much. It was such a privilege to be here with you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.